Afghanistan, the COVID vaccine, and stay in Mexico. I'm Heather Godwin, and this is The Square Circle. Hello, and welcome to The Square Circle. I'm your host, Heather Godwin. Joining us today are libertarian Kat Murti of Feminists for Liberty. Hello, Kat.
Hi, thanks for having me on today.
Conservative columnist and Newsweek contributing editor Peter Roff. Hello, Peter.
Hello,
nice
Heather.
to have you.
It's good to be here.
And progressive political columnist James Rosen. Hi, James. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Heather. Hope you are too.
This week, as if the situation in Afghanistan were not chaotic enough, on Thursday, 2 blasts killed a number of people, some of them Americans. And this comes less than a week before the Biden administration's August 31st deadline for getting all American personnel out of the country. Political columnist James Rosen, how do you think this will turn out?
Badly. I wrote last year that any deal negotiated with the Taliban was worthless, that they would not keep their word. We could not trust them. I didn't believe anything they said. And I think that President Biden's blaming the Trump negotiated deal is really, really kind of shameful. President Biden has changed 18 different things, and that's probably an undercount. He's changed 18 different things that that President Trump instituted, either the executive order or other means, and he could have changed this. Just as President Trump pulled out of a much more complex and deeper agreement with the Iran nuclear deal, he could have pulled out of this. He could have postponed it. He could have said there are things he doesn't like. He wants it renegotiated. He chose not to do that. And, polls, he was listening to the polls. Polls show that the majority of Americans want US troops out of Afghanistan. And I think the last 3 presidents, since President Bush sent troops into Afghanistan, have pledged to remove them. So, that he campaigned on that, and so did President Trump. But the precipitous, overly precipitous withdrawal, without a plan, without backup plans and contingencies, was just horribly embarrassing. And then to blame President Trump is really beneath him.
This is very much another Vietnam. The situation pulling out, even shot by shot of what we saw, this is just the same type of situation. And if there's one lesson we should have learned from Vietnam that we seem to have not learned again in Afghanistan, it's that the United States is not good at nation building, and nation building is not going to work. People are saying that we pulled out too early, and certainly it does seem like there wasn't a clear plan in place for what was actually going to happen as we start pulling out and the Taliban starts taking over. But the fact of the matter is the United States has been in Afghanistan for 20 years. There are troops in Afghanistan who weren't born at the time that the United States went in. I don't know how much longer we could have been there and truthfully expected to have a different result. The entire mission was just a bad idea. It wasn't going to work. It's not going to work in the future. The situation is horrible. It's horrendous. There's a lot of people in a very dangerous situation. I agree with James that the Taliban should never be trusted, of course, but I'm not sure that remaining longer would have changed anything.
Peter, what's your point of view?
Well, in fact, America is good at nation building. We built this one. We rebuilt Italy. We rebuilt Japan. We rebuilt Germany after the war. And guess what? We still have troops in Germany and Italy. We broke Afghanistan. That means we bought it. Rather than leave, we should have stayed. And the rationale for the mission, which was originally to expel al-Qaeda from its terrorist camps in Afghanistan, where they trained to attack American soldiers and American symbols, became keeping the Taliban and keeping Al-Qaeda from coming back. The Biden collapse on the evacuation of Americans and Afghan friends of America, the idiotic decision to close Bagram Air Base while people still needed to get out of the country, the fact that so many easily disposable weapons were left behind to be seized by the Taliban, says that Team Biden, from a national security perspective, isn't ready for AAA ball, let alone major league decisions. This has made America look worse in the eyes of the world, and our Russian enemies and our Chinese competitors are salivating over the prospect of getting their hands on the natural resources that are available to be developed in Afghanistan, and they don't particularly care how the Taliban treats women, children, or anyone else that does not adhere to their strict brand of Islam.
If I can add to what Peter said, nation building is kind of a loaded term. I mean, if you look at South Korea, if you look at Germany, if you look at Japan, if you look at a number of countries around the world, we stabilized those countries by keeping a relatively small number of troops. Germany would be an exception, but that was during the Cold War. But keeping a relatively small number of troops, and we could have prevented, for instance, the fall of Kandahar and the fall of Kabul. I think by keeping, again, I don't know how many, 10,000, 15,000 troops and surrounding those cities and not letting the Taliban enter, that would have been a small price to pay. We don't say that we're occupying South Korea. We don't say we're occupying Germany. We still could have said, President Biden still could have said, I've completed the withdrawal of combat troops. I have kept some troops there to stabilize the country and to prevent the Western friendly government from falling. He could have had it both ways. I don't know why he didn't do that.
Well, no, I think the reason that he didn't do it, and this has been pointed out by people who have been searching through both the memoirs of President Ford and Secretary Don Rumsfeld, who was defense secretary not just for George Bush, but back in the Ford administration, that when Nixon negotiated the withdrawal of U.S. troops from South Vietnam, there were provisions that the South Vietnamese military would still receive financial and material support from the United States. In the 74 elections in which the Republicans were routed, the new class of Democrats, many of whom were anti-war activists, thought that funding for South Vietnam ought to be cut off entirely. And so what you saw over time were North Vietnamese tanks rolling south into Saigon through the gates of the embassy. And we have it from reliable sources that Joe Biden, then a United States Senator, was in the White House, in the Oval Office, meeting with President Ford and other senators, arguing that this is what we should allow to happen. That we should not be spending any of our money or any of our troops to defend them. This is perfectly consistent with his approach to foreign policy throughout his 50 years in public life. Bob Gates, the former Secretary of Defense, has said he has been wrong on every major foreign policy decision of his career, and this reinforces the Gates assessment.
Frankly, I do believe that President Biden completely botched the pullout here, but to be honest, there's a reason why President Obama ran on this ticket, President Trump ran on this ticket, and neither of them ended up doing it. No matter who pulled out of Afghanistan, it was going to go poorly. But that also doesn't change the fact that the United States being in Afghanistan for the last 20 years, as well as their previous involvement during the Cold War, has also created several problems. The rise of the ISIS largely happened because of United States involvement in the Middle East. There's been a there's been more terrorism because of our involvement there. There are certainly many things that we could do to help the people of Afghanistan, but remaining there, bombing, droning is not the way to go. And frankly, the problem is that the United States doesn't really have the moral high ground here, particularly considering that we ally ourselves with governments like Saudi Arabia that are almost as bad as the Taliban. And what it looks like right now with what people are talking about, what I honestly don't believe in, at least so far, a kinder, softer Taliban, even if that does turn out to be the case, it's not going to be that different from the government of the KSA, whom we view as our allies.
And I have to say, I'm no fan of the Saudis, but the Taliban is in an entirely different league from just about every other government, legitimate or not, in the Middle East and perhaps most of the world. The Taliban are thugs who use religion as a cover to do whatever it is they want to do. They terrorize women and children. They have no respect for humanity or anything, or history or anything but themselves. The last time they were in power, they tried to launch a Maoist-style cultural revolution to wipe out centuries of Afghan history. These are not nice people. And James is correct. Had we chosen to remain there, had we chosen simply to keep the Bagram interface open, it would have been a signal to the rest of the world that Afghanistan gets to work out its own problems and rest of the world stay out, because someone's been keeping the Taliban alive since they were removed from power in 2001. Was it Iran? Was it the Chinese? Was it the Russians? Was it a combination therein? Somebody's been doing it. Be nice to know who. It'd be interesting to know who. But the point is, we could have sent a signal to the rest of the world. Afghanistan is going to settle its own problems, and we're going to help it develop its own pluralistic culture where people are allowed to live in peace, even if they have profound religious differences.
All right. Well, thank you. We'll have to leave it there. Also this week, the FDA granted full approval of the Pfizer vaccine. Here's ABC with the news story.
This morning, major new developments in the fight against COVID-19. The FDA granting full approval for Pfizer's vaccine, the fastest vaccine approval in FDA history.
Those who've been waiting for full approval should go get your shot now.
Pfizer becoming the first vaccine to move past emergency use authorization. Their shot, made with mRNA, does not contain any part of the coronavirus and does not alter people's DNA. In order to get full FDA approval, Pfizer had to undergo a more stringent review, submitting results from its ongoing clinical trials and proving substantial evidence of effectiveness.
Kat Murti, Feminist for Liberty. Do you think this will change people's minds who have staunchly refused to take the vaccine, using that as one of the reasons why?
I think that the FDA has totally screwed up this entire vaccine rollout. The vaccine was available in January of 2020. I think that this is a fundamental issue of medical rights, right to try, and self-sovereignty, ownership of one's own body. We all have our own, my body, my choice. We should have allowed people who wanted to take the vaccine in January to take it. That could have potentially saved a lot of lives. What we've seen now is that people who are vaccinated, even if they do become infected, are much less likely to have severe cases and significantly less likely to die. It would have completely changed the face of this pandemic, and of course, it would have been a vote of confidence for people's right to choose for themselves whether or not to be vaccinated. Instead, we've created a situation where the FDA held off for almost a full year between January and December in approving this vaccine, even for experimental use, allowing Americans to make the choice to take this vaccine. In that time, several people died. And in that time, the FDA created this idea for a lot of people that they don't want to take the vaccine because it's not safe. They're not going to, those people, I would like to say that they might change their minds on it, but I think a lot of people are not going to change their minds at this point because they're going to see it as a political decision that was made because of a shift in power from R's to D's, and not because of anything specific about the vaccine, about the data, or about anything that the FDA itself has done from a medical or scientific point of view.
James, what are your thoughts?
Well, maybe I missed something. This is the first I've heard that the vaccine was available in January of 2020. I thought you misspoke and you meant January of 2021, which is when I got the vaccine. I got it early. The vaccine, I had not heard the vaccine was available January of 2020. I had not heard that.
So in January of 2020, the vaccine had been created. The FDA did not allow people to try it because they viewed it as experimental. The FDA only allowed people to begin getting vaccinated in December of 2020.
But there had
been available since January 2020. It was just not available to the American public.
But there had been no trials whatsoever in January 2020, and the trials they did do last year were much more limited in scope than normal trials and much quicker. So I mean, I don't know. I would not have taken the vaccine before the limited trials, and I'm not hesitant, but I mean, I would not have taken and I think most Americans, if the FDA had said, we haven't had any trials and we haven't tested this, but go ahead, take it if you wish, I don't think a lot of Americans would have taken it.
I think you're right, James, and I wouldn't have taken it either. But here's the thing, a lot of Americans would have, and it should have been their choice to do so. And a lot of Americans who might have taken that vaccine ended up dying of COVID in that time. And I think that that's an important point we shouldn't miss.
Peter, what's your point of view?
Well, once again, the FDA is a day late and a dollar short. And this is really frustrating to me. In fact, we could have been giving out the vaccine last summer. Now, there are a whole bunch of things that came into play. The presidential election, the general dislike among talking heads for Trump, which influenced the way they talked about COVID and talked about the way he managed it. A whole bunch of people being able to get on social media and pretend they were doctors and pretend they were scientists and pretend that they knew what was going on with COVID. And so a lot of this the hysteria has driven this pandemic that drove the lockdowns, which killed people. I think that we are going to discover at some future date in the look back research that more people died because of the lockdowns, which were unnecessary, than died from COVID. Now, the FDA position that it's okay to die from COVID, but we're going to prevent you from dying from this shot we haven't tested, which might prevent you from dying of COVID, is typical government think. Here, though, is the real problem. The FDA just gave full approval to a vaccine for a virus that is disappearing. Whether you want to call it Wuhan virus or the alpha version or COVID 1.0, we're now worried about the Delta variant. So rather than spending time manufacturing vaccines for a variant that we appear to have conquered, the same permissions that were given to the US pharmaceutical companies to engage in Operation Warp Speed should have been extended by the Biden administration to expedite the development and production of a vaccine that focuses on the Delta variant, because that's what everybody's dealing with now.
We are doing that. That's exactly what we're doing. I mean, if you read, I'm not a scientist, but that's exactly what we're doing. 98% of the cases are Delta variant now, and Pfizer and Moderna, the other companies, are I don't know if they have to tweak the old vaccine or a new one, but they're now developing a vaccine for the Delta variant.
It's probably a tweak, and we don't know if COVID will keep mutating or if it's going to be an annual thing like the flu is, which I have described. Flu is not a SARS virus. But the point here is that we're still worried about the FDA putting its imprimatur of approval on a vaccine that did the job we needed it to do. We should be moving on. As a country, we should be having the conversation about moving on. Instead, they want to give everybody booster shots to improve your immunity against the variation of the virus that we think we now have under control.
Moving on to the Supreme Court dealing a blow to Biden's administration immigration policy. Here is the story from Reuters.
The U.S. Supreme Court on Tuesday denied President Joe Biden's attempt to block the Remain in Mexico policy set under his predecessor, Donald Trump. The immigration policy forces thousands of asylum seekers to stay in Mexico as they await U.S. hearings. The highest court rejected Biden's attempt to block a Texas federal court ruling requiring the government to revive Trump's policy, formerly known as the Migrant Protection Protocols Program.
Newsweek's Peter Roff. Did the court get it right?
Absolutely. The policy, as explained by the Trump administration, is the right policy. The problem of people trying to cut through the line of legal immigration to get into the United States as a political refugee, as an asylum seeker, is tremendous. There are certain countries to the south of the United States that purposefully put immigrants coming into their countries and push them up across our border, tell them you're seeking asylum. They want to get them off their dole. They are not our responsibility. If we choose to give them asylum, that makes it different. If they're just trying to shortcut the legal immigration line, they're wrong. They ought to go back to where they started or apply from where they are. They should not be given the opportunity to come into the United States and then be given a court date or an interview date that they don't show up for because they've disappeared into an underground economy and an underground society. A country cannot remain intact if it can't protect its borders. This is one small step towards protecting the territorial integrity of the United States. And I say that as someone who is an incredibly strong proponent of legal immigration.
The American immigration system is fundamentally broken. I think it starts right from that concept of getting in line. The line in the U.S., for many people, does not, to the U.S., to legal immigration does not exist. And when it does, it's laughable how long it is. For an Indian with an advanced degree to emigrate legally to the United States, the average wait is 150 years. The human lifespan is significantly shorter than 150 years. So when you're talking about get in line, a lot of times where it's rhetoric, it doesn't actually mean anything. But let's talk about the refugee crisis. This is something that's particularly timely right now with what's going on in Afghanistan. We're going to have a whole lot more refugees, and the U.S. has botched this over and over and over again. Remain in Mexico is no different. This is a situation that was created under Trump that has been maintained under Biden, despite the recent push to have it changed. Fundamentally, what we've got is a situation where people are staying in bad conditions in Mexico, unable to apply for asylum. It incentivizes families to split up, to send their unaccompanied minor children across the border in hopes, just simply hopes that they might be able to get a better life. It's honestly, it's horrible. It reflects very poorly on the United States. All the conversation around it oftentimes falls back onto this political rhetoric that's just simply not grounded in fact. There's this lie that we hear that the Democrats are pushing for increased immigration and the Republicans are pushing back against it. But fundamentally, neither party is really the pro-immigration party. It just behooves them at the polls to pretend that they are. And that's not what's happening. America is a nation of immigrants. It was built by immigrants. It continues to be maintained by immigrants. And we need to have a fairer system. And we need to be looking at what's actually happening here, particularly now as more and more people around the world are in bad situations that America caused many times. And so I think this is just one more bad immigration policy.
James Rosen, your opinion?
This is so complicated. I mean, I've been a Washington correspondent for, it's going to age me, for 27 years. And I've been covering immigration for 27 years. And I think Peter, saying the immigration system is broken, that's an exaggeration. I mean, President Obama was continually criticized by the Republicans for open borders, and yet he deported twice as many so-called illegal aliens as President W. Bush did. So he was tough on people, undocumented workers, much tougher than W was. And so in that case, the system was working, I guess, the way it was designed to work. But there's been a fundamental difference in this country since our very beginnings between people who simply want to immigrate here for economic reasons, whose lives are not being threatened, and people seeking asylum. I mean, the Cubans who we took in and who now make up a major portion of South Florida are in a very different category than the Indians who trying to come here on high-tech visas, and they need to be treated differently. Even over our southern border, the Venezuelans who come up north to Mexico and then try to come into our country, the Venezuelans, certainly many of them have faced much greater threat to their lives and their families than the Mexicans who they join near the border trying to cross into the United States. And so I just think, as we've done from the beginning, I think we need to treat these different national groups differently. But we certainly, I think the worst thing we could do is to say we are no longer a nation, which is what started happening under President Trump. He vastly decreased the number of of refugees we would accept from any previous president of both parties. I think if we lose that, if we no longer become a nation that takes true refugees of violence and pain to their families, then we lose a large part of our national identity.
All right, let's take some questions from our viewers now. Josephine. Thank you, Josephine. Would the withdrawal from Afghanistan have happened differently if Trump were still president? Who would like to take that one?
I think it would, because I think it would have stopped. The minute the Taliban started seizing territory at the point of a gun, I think Mr. Trump would have said, okay, we had a deal, the deal's broken. We're not leaving, I'm going to send a few thousand more Marines and crack troops in to protect U.S. personnel in Kabul and in other parts of the country, and to protect aid workers and the rest. And you would not have seen the country collapse, the country's civil institutions collapse the way that they did, because again, America would have been there as the backstop for them.
Well, let's remember that President Obama campaigned ardors, very much on pulling out of Afghanistan, and then sent was it 13,000 or 30,000, sent a large contingent of new troops into Afghanistan, increased our presence there. So he completely reversed the position that he had campaigned on. This again is not a red-blue issue. I agree. I think if Trump was still president, he would have changed course. I mean, this all happened very quickly. The thing fell apart, between May and August? What is that, 3 months? It happened quickly. But I agree that Trump would have, kept some soldiers there or sent some more in, as Obama did.
Kat, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think that one thing that was different was that President Trump didn't pull troops out of Afghanistan. He, just as President Obama, campaigned on the grounds that he would, and neither of them did. I think that, again, President Biden certainly botched the way in which he has pulled troops out. However, I will give him credit for the fact that he at least did. The United States should not have been in Afghanistan. We should not have spent the last 20 years there. The United States should not be going around the world, guns blazing, trying to remake other countries. We should be focused on building a better America here at home and allowing those who want to come and contribute to do so.
And our second viewer question is from Tyler, and it's related, but it takes us back to 9/11. If you had known immediately after 9/11 what you know now, would you have advised against invading Afghanistan?
No, we had to topple that government.
So I was 13 years old when 9/11 happened. I was in algebra class at the exact time, and I opposed invading Afghanistan and the Iraq War at that point, and I still do now for the exact same reasons.
I was around the corner from the White House when the plane hit the Pentagon with a friend of mine on it. I absolutely would have supported the invasion then. I would support the invasion now, knowing what I now know. I would have not supported what happened this week.
Okay, now let's move on to the most underreported story of the week. Who would like to go first?
I'll go. I have a truly disturbing story, unfortunately. But the Bombay High Court in Mumbai, India, earlier this week, ruled that marital rape is not a crime yet again, provided that that a woman is under the age of 18. It is worth noting that in India, marriage is not legal for a woman under 18 yet. This continues to be the case. In this particular and disturbing case, a husband actually paralyzed his wife in the course of rape, and it was ruled that that was in fact not illegal, and he had a total legal right to do so. Marital rape is still legal in 32 countries around the world, and even here in the United States, where marital rape was only illegalized in 1993 in all states, there are still several places where rape is treated differently based upon marital status. And so I think that this is an extremely concerning issue, and one that's just not getting any coverage.
Peter, most underreported story.
I think the underreported story that concerns me the most continues to be the allegations that the people who were involved in the January 6th demonstrations at the U.S. Capitol are being mistreated and denied due process. I realize it's a bit ironic, since what they were doing in a way spits on the Constitution. But nonetheless, the Constitution is supposed to protect us all. And the fact that some of the, well, let's say less creditable public voices on this issue have been some of the most far-right members of the House of Representatives hasn't helped matters. But it is incredible to me, the zeal with which the FBI has pursued people, even if they were just there at the demonstration and never went inside the building, versus some of the other cases that they've seemed to treat, politically charged cases, that they've seemed to treat kind of lackadaisically, like the Hillary Clinton email issue and the violation of the security safeguards, some of which are punishable by jail sentences if you're found to be in violation. But these people are being held. There are allegations that they're being denied access to counsel, so that they can be pressured to plead, so that none of these cases have to go to court, and they can extract guilty pleas from them, to save face and prevent an examination of what went on. That's just the kind of behavior that we were rebelling against in 1776.
Thank you. James Rosen, your most underreported story of the week.
You know, believe it or not, I think the underreported story is how unbelievably, incredibly, historically effective the vaccines have been against COVID. When the trials ended, and again, they were short trials, shorter than usual, with far fewer people, the results were, or the predictions were, that the vaccines would be 95% effective, and everybody thought that was incredible. That's more effective than most vaccines that have been approved. And in fact, if you look at the numbers, even with the Delta variant, if you look at the numbers, the vaccines are something like, if you just crack the numbers and do the math, which I've done on an ongoing basis, the vaccines are something like 99.99987% effective. And furthermore, even Dr. Fauci, I've heard him interviewed recently on on TV a couple times. He muddies the message, and I think he contributes to vaccine hesitancy by understating how effective the vaccines have been. And even against the Delta variant, they are still. If you look at the number of hospitalizations now compared with the number of hospitalizations a year ago, it's a tiny fraction. If you look at the number of deaths now compared with the number of deaths a year ago, it's a minuscule fraction.
Well, thank you, Peter, James, and Kat, for the interesting conversation. Always nice to have you on.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having me yet again.
Thanks, Heather.
That's all we have time for. Thanks again, and thank you all for listening to The Square Circle. We'll see you next week.